She stepped down from the stagecoach in white lace gloves and eyes still clinging to hope. But the wind of this town didn't welcome her kind. Gideon Hale, the man who once wrote her letters soft as cotton, just stared, then turned his back before the crowd. His voice rose, loud enough for all to hear. "I don't marry colored women." No one objected. No one lowered their gaze. Only doors closing behind her one by one. The hotel refused her a room. The bakery never met her eyes. And every glance that passed over her moved on, like she was dust the town never meant to gather. That night, Annalise curled up in an abandoned stable, clinging to her mother's old handkerchief. The smell of damp cloth and burnt straw was all she had left between the freezing dark and the silence no one dared break. She didn't cry. She braced herself, as if the whole world was watching, just to see when she'd finally break. She came with lace gloves and a heart full of hope. But no one told the town it had to welcome her. The wheels bit into frozen dirt. The driver hollered, "Maple Hollow!" End of the line. Horses neighed, iron hooves pressing deep into cracked ground. Cold wind slashed through the wooden seams, sharp as steel grating bone. Annalise Booker remained seated inside the carriage. Her lace-gloved hands were folded atop a weathered leather suitcase, corners frayed, the same way her fingers still held onto the cold from a three-town night train. The air was thick with the scent of humans, the sweat of passing time, and a faint trail of peppermint oil from a widow who'd stepped off 2 stops ago. She looked out the fogged window where frost had painted delicate patterns like glass-born ferns. Then she drew in a breath and opened the door. Her heel touched the brittle ice coating the dirt road of Maple Hollow, Colorado. November 1876. The street was stitched with a thin crust of snow, hardened, echoing under the weight of passing boots. A saloon door creaked closed. The sign above it, half a name and nothing more. Smoke from someone's chimney wandered through the air like it had no home to claim. Annalise took a few steps. The wind broke through the layers of her best dress. Her lace glove, once a luxury, now bore a tear at the ring finger. And then she saw him. Gideon Hale stepped out from beneath the inn's awning, hat pulled low, frame sharp against the cold. For a moment, his arm jerked. Recognition. Then hesitation, like he'd just spotted something that shouldn't have been there. "You're Miss Booker?" "Yes." Gideon froze. His eyes cooled. "You didn't say in your letters that you were colored." Annalise said nothing. "I didn't send for a bride like that." Heads turned. Somewhere nearby someone chuckled, a dry sound, cracking like old paint, as the word Negro cut through the cold air. "I traveled a week on your letter. You promised—" "There's no promise here," he snapped. "You deceived me. And that name, Booker, don't bring it up again." He turned. The door shut behind him. Annalise remained still. The ground didn't yield a sound beneath her heel, but humiliation didn't need noise to be heard. She walked toward the hotel. Before she could speak, the man behind the counter said, "We're full." "I can pay. We don't take money from folks like you." Outside, lanterns flickered to life. Voices scattered along the street. Snow drifted sideways on the wind. By the time the dark settled over crooked rooftops, she wandered the main street with no destination, carrying her suitcase and a silence that pressed tight against her ribs. At the far end, a broken-down stable came into view. Roof sagging, door half-hinged, but a faint glow seeped through the slats. Maybe enough for one night. She slipped inside. A horse stirred in the shadows, chewing softly. She moved to the farthest corner, out of any wandering eye, laid down her coat on a mess of straw, set the suitcase beside her. From its folds, she pulled a handkerchief, embroidered with a bee, stitched long ago by her mother, and wrapped it around her neck like it could warm what no hearth would. Overhead, moonlight slipped through a cracked roof beam, cold, thin, like a seam ripped open with no one to sew it shut. She did not cry. The cold might reach the bone, but it could not touch her dignity. The man had turned his back. She had not. And sometimes, the one who stays is the one who reveals who's truly running. Outside, Maple Hollow curled into itself beneath a shallow snow. No storm yet. Not yet. But it would come. He didn't offer kindness, just a key and a warning. There was no sunrise the next morning, only a veil of ash-colored fog draped over the rooftops. The cold embers of a long night clung to saddle leather, to musty sleeves, to the breath of half-sleeping beasts. In the stable, the wood creaked softly, as if exhaling a sigh held back for years. Annalise opened her eyes. Her shoulders were stiff, neck aching, but her gaze was clear. She sat up, brushed straw from her skirt, checked her suitcase, still beside her, then rose without apology, as if she hadn't just spent the night curled among moldy hay and shadows. Her limbs trembled faintly, but her back remained straight. The stable door creaked open. It wasn't the wind. A man stood there, his silhouette haloed in the dull light of a dirt-colored morning. He didn't speak at once, just looked, direct, unpolished, but absent of pity. What stood before him was not a beggar. It was a survivor. "You're the bride Gideon Hale turned away?" His voice was rough, low, each word scraped from an old wound in the throat. "Annalise Booker," she replied, straightening as if taking roll call in a classroom long gone. He nodded. "Silas Whitaker, doctor here." Then, with no soft edges, "I need someone to clean the clinic. There's a back room. No one else will help you." An offer, nothing more. No comfort, no sermon, no blanket handed down from the heavens. Just a door, cracked open, wide enough to crawl through. Annalise looked at him. He stood a head taller, lean and weathered like bare branches outlasting winter. His right hand was wrapped in worn gauze, but patches of his skin showed. Calloused, sun-scorched, lined like parched earth. He leaned subtly on his left leg, limping as if balance had left him long ago, but still moving forward. "I accept," she said, not out of gratitude, but because what choice was left? Silas pointed down the alley. "Clinic's at the end of Main. You'll find it." Then he turned. No questions. No stories. He didn't ask why she was in that stable or what brought her to this town. He only saw this. Someone in need of shelter, and he needed hands to scrub the dust from forgotten scalpels. The clinic was a 2-story wood building, pine pitch smeared across the boards, windows dimmed with time and vapor. Inside, it was neither bright nor dim, just quiet. Silas pushed the door open and nodded toward the interior. "Your room's in back. Small stove, single bed, lock on the inside." He tossed a ring of keys onto the desk. "Don't ask me anything. Just keep it clean. I make my rounds each morning. You work during the day." Annalise stepped inside, each footfall as if testing new soil. The wooden floor let out a familiar groan, like this place had lived in someone's memory she hadn't met yet. Her room was narrow, a single bed, a lopsided wardrobe, a small window overlooking the alley, but it was cleaner than the stable, and warmer than a rejection spoken in steel. Silas didn't linger. As he turned, she noticed the slight wince in his shoulder, his hand briefly bracing the ache. She said nothing. The door closed. Silence followed, not the kind that demanded conversation, nor the kind that tried to save someone from being alone. That afternoon, she began in the waiting room. The walls wore fingerprints of time, yellowed stains, dust thick in the seams of every chair. The scent of old antiseptic lingered. Not foul, not familiar, just enough to remind one that people had once groaned here, and someone else had tried to save them. She removed her coat, rolled up her sleeves, started under the tables, then the shelves, then the windows. Each grain of wood, each stubborn grime, scrubbed as if she were erasing something deeper than surface dirt. No one watched, but she worked as if someone did, measuring her worth through the rhythm of her effort. When Silas returned, dusk was splitting through the frame like a dull orange blade. He paused at the threshold, eyeing the room now transformed. "You've done a lot." "I believe in earning my place with my hands," Annalise replied. Not soft, just firm. He didn't smile, but he nodded. Not in agreement, but the practiced motion of a man who'd learned to acknowledge with silence. She looked at his hand, for the first time close enough to see it proper. The scar ran from wrist to elbow, the skin a patchwork of burns fused without symmetry. When he removed his coat, she saw his leg too, wooden in movement, stiff at the knee. "Old wounds," he said, catching her glance. "Part from Gettysburg, part from a field hospital fire." She didn't ask, only nodded, then quietly added, "People often don't believe what they can't understand." Silas held her gaze, and they hate what they refuse to try to. The two stood in stillness for a breath. "I'll show you how I keep the instruments and medicine, tomorrow," he said. "I'll learn." "Not for me. Number for me." That evening, they ate at the same table, not out of camaraderie, but because there was only one kitchen. A bowl of potato soup sat between them, bread sliced in half. She poured water. He ate slowly, spoon in his left hand, the right curled stiff beside him, fighting to stay still. As she cleared the dishes, he asked quietly, "Why didn't you leave?" She didn't lift her eyes. "I've left before, other places. But if I run just because they want me gone, I'll be running forever." He nodded, and for the first time, his gaze met hers, not as a doctor or a stranger, but as an equal. "No one helped me when I needed it," Silas said. "And now you're helping me? Number I just handed you a key. The rest is yours to choose." And in that, there was no debt, only a recognition. That night, when Annalise lay down, she didn't bolt the door, not from trust, but because exhaustion had replaced fear. The wind still slipped through the window, a whistle from the past, mocking the present. But she lay on a real bed, with a pillow and a blanket, and no one had sent her away. Across the wall, wooden steps limped once, then faded. Silas wasn't kind, but he hadn't turned away. And for Annalise, that was enough. For tonight. Mornings in Maple Hollow didn't begin with rooster calls, but with the slow creak of timber warming beneath early sun and the soft crumble of snow slipping from rooftops. In the quiet clinic at the edge of town, the rhythm of a broom brushing dust filled the air like a song only one person heard. Annalise began in the corners, places the light forgot, where the dust was older than her presence in this town. She didn't ask questions, didn't seek instruction. She watched, listened, and understood how the room spoke through its weariness. She answered with calloused fingers and eyes that refused to look away. The clinic changed, slow but sure. Medicine bottles reordered by the hue of their glass, bandages folded into crisp lines. The wooden floor scrubbed until it gleamed like winter ice. The draft no longer brought mold, but carried a hint of rosemary, tied in a small bundle she'd hung in the corner, a habit from her mother's kitchen. Silas didn't praise her. He simply noticed. He came and went, dragging his limp through the halls with the scent of pipe smoke trailing behind. Each time he stepped through the door, his eyes would flick across the room, not to comment, but to confirm that she was still there, that the house still served its purpose. Once, when he stumbled lightly into the leg of a metal table, Annalise reached out to steady him. He recoiled by instinct, then looked at her, not as a servant, but as someone who had stepped past a line neither had drawn. They never spoke of it, but the silence between them, a moat of caution, had narrowed by half a stride. That afternoon, a man burst through the clinic door, shirt soaked with blood, carrying a screaming boy. The child had fallen in a lumber shed, his knee gashed open, flesh peeled near to bone. Silas rose from his desk without a word. Annalise was already moving before he could turn. "Clean water, bandages, small scalpel," he barked. "In the wooden cabinet by the door," she said over her shoulder. When she returned, her hands did not tremble. She held the boy as Silas cleaned the wound, while the scalpel sliced into swollen skin. Blood stained her dress, but she never flinched. Silas stitched with his left hand, his right too stiff for such work. Annalise held the lantern, wiped sweat from the boy's brow, and when the final knot was tied, she was the one who cradled him until exhaustion silenced his cries. When the father stammered his thanks and carried his son home, Silas stood motionless, left hand braced on the table, right clenched in stillness. "You worked in a hospital?" he asked, eyes fixed elsewhere. "No," she said. "I cared for my mother for 8 years. Bone cancer. I learned how to clean ulcers, mix medicines, ease her pain. A doctor taught me what I needed." "You learn fast." "I used to teach," she replied, kneeling to gather the bloodied cloth. "Learning is muscle memory." Silas said nothing. But that evening, as dusk settled through the clinic windows, he stepped into the supply room and left the door open. She followed. From that day on, he let her touch the medicine jars, unlock cabinets, arrange dried herbs and glass tubes. Not quite a nurse, not merely help, but no longer a stranger. That night, they shared a quiet supper in the small kitchen, a pot of vegetable stew, the scent of dried garlic and cracked pepper rising between them. Silas spoke even less than usual. Annalise didn't press. As she washed dishes, he sat nearby, watching the motion of her hands. "You said you taught?" "Colored elementary school, Philadelphia." "Why'd you leave?" "Because the parents couldn't stomach a black woman teaching their children," she said, without bitterness or dodge. "I was asked to resign, politely, of course." Silas exhaled, a sharp, rasped sound caught in his throat. "Some things we're good at, but never allowed to keep." She nodded. "My name used to be on a chalkboard. Now it's on a list of names no one hires." He sat in silence for a long time. Then, as if speaking only to himself, "I studied medicine in Boston. Then came the war, then a hospital firing. Because I'm mixed blood. No one wanted a Cheyenne doctor treating them, unless they were dying." Annalise turned. In the lamplight, the lines in his cheek carved deep with years that didn't go gently. "Maybe we ought to stop healing," she said quietly. Even when we save lives, they still doubt us. Maybe, he replied, but we don't know how to do anything else. Another quiet. Then he added, do you want to learn more? I have some medical books upstairs. Annalise nodded. No need for thanks. That night she sat on the back stoop, beneath a roof dusted with snow, pencil worn dull in her hand. In her lap, a small notebook. She wrote down the medicines they used today, the way Silas wrapped the child's wound, the boy's face when the pain began to lift. At the top of the page, she wrote, Annalise B. Medical notes. She didn't write the full last name. Booker still felt heavy, still stained by that first day. But line by line, page by page, she was writing a new name. Not with ink, but with what she did. And maybe one day she'd sign it, every letter, without needing to hide a single part. Snow didn't fall the way stories claimed. It didn't pour from the heavens or bury the earth in a night. It arrived slowly, like a breath held too long. One layer, then another, blanketing rooftops, fading the worn paths of hooves and carts, even covering those roads no one dared walk anymore. Maple Hollow sank into silence. Inside the clinic, the stove still glowed. The scent of dried onion and licorice root mingled in the smoke. A pot simmered low on the wood-burning range. Silas pressed a hand to a young girl's forehead, her eyelids half closed, her breath raspy like wind slipping through window cracks. Flu, he said, curt. Third wave this season. Annalise didn't ask questions. She wrung out a cloth, placed it on the child's brow, her hands steady, precise. The days blurred into a chain of fevers. No morning or night, only time marked by fresh bandages, soft moans of pain, and the way they both sat beside the stove, red-eyed with fatigue but unwilling to rest. Silas worked himself hollow. His bad leg dragged behind him, stiff with cold, but he didn't stop. His eyes were bloodshot, lips cracked. Once, when he lowered himself beside a patient and his hand trembled, Annalise handed him a cup of water without a word. You need sleep, she said, voice low. There are 4 more waiting in the hall, he replied. They said nothing else. But that night, when the last child finally drifted into sleep and the stove had cooled, Silas leaned against the wall, legs stretched, eyes toward a ceiling lined with soot. I once had a clinic, he said. Annalise didn't speak, but her hands stilled mid-fold with the towel. In Arkansas, in an abandoned chapel. Saved 5 Union men there once. Thought maybe I could start again. She sat down beside him, not close, not distant. One night, he continued. He didn't need to say who. They poured oil around the walls, lit the place up, bolted the doors. I lost everything, patients, classmates, and even the journals I brought from Boston. He turned to her. I was the only one who made it. Jumped through a window, broke my leg, burned my hand, but I lived. Annalise didn't say, I'm sorry. After a moment, she simply said, my father used to teach reading in our barn, to folks who weren't allowed to know their own letters. Silas understood. That night, she continued, voice even as a schoolroom lesson, they hanged him from the almond tree behind the house. I was 12. My mother held me back so I wouldn't run. Wind scraped past the window. The fire cracked in its hearth like breath. After that, she said, I learned to read as defiance. Every page was a vow. I won't forget the name Booker, but I won't let it be where my father's story ends. Silas didn't look at her, but he nodded, slow. As if something inside him, some part war hadn't burned away, had finally seen her not as the woman who scrubbed floors, but as one who kept names, kept oaths, and carried faith through a world that begged her to surrender. In the nights that followed, while snow thickened outside, they sorted the medicine cabinet together. Silas pulled each jar, reciting the herbs: honeysuckle, angelica, licorice root. His voice had lost its dryness. It moved with a slow rhythm, like a man telling stories not for others, but to remind himself. Annalise remembered every word. She wrote on scraps of cloth, medicine wrappers, later copying it into her small journal. Her eyes were sharp, as if each mark on the page was a spine in something worth resurrecting. Right dose means life, Silas said. Too much means death. I understand, she answered, eyes never leaving his. One evening, as she reached to measure out a mixture, her hand brushed his. He paused, watching her fingers, browned by sun, calloused at the base of the thumb. You have a healer's hands, he said. Not a compliment. A truth. Spoken like pointing to a scar and saying, this too is part of you now. That night, as they sat near the fire, Silas pulled out 2 chipped porcelain cups. Someone once told me, he said, when 2 survivors share their stories, they're no longer strangers. Annalise didn't answer, but she reached for her journal, opened a page, and handed it to him. Cold remedy, notes from Silas Whitaker. He looked, nodded, said nothing, but when she returned to her room, a folded handkerchief waited on her desk. It wasn't new, but it was clean. On its edge, stitched in black thread, was a single name, A. Booker. Her name. For the first time, not spoken, not demanded. That night, the wind changed. Dry gusts swept in from the eastern ridge, laced with the scent of burnt wood and thawing snow, like winter and summer had collided somewhere beyond the edge of town. Inside the clinic, Annalise sat hunched over her notebook, copying the formula for honeysuckle root tincture and precise morphine dosages. Silas leaned against the wall, eyes closed, left hand wrapped around a cup of cold water. Neither spoke. Not until the sound of unfamiliar hoofbeats rang out on Main Street, then stopped. A second noise. Not a knock, but boots hitting the ground. Footsteps without breath behind them. Annalise looked up. Silas opened his eyes. A crack rang out, sharp and close. The front window shuddered, then shattered. A torch sliced through the air, flames trailing like a serpent. It slammed into the linen drapes behind the reception counter, fire snapping and clawing as it met wood. Back! Silas barked, but Annalise was already at the stove bucket, flinging water toward the flames licking up the wall. Outside, voices shouted, Whitaker! Come out! Take that savage out of this town, or next time it won't be lanterns. Silas yanked open a drawer, pulled a weathered Colt. He pushed Annalise behind the privacy screen. Grab the med kit, your notes, and the morphine. Get to the back door. Go. She didn't move. And you? Another crash. More glass. A second torch shot through the side window, striking a shelf. Shards flew. The flame caught Silas's coat as he shielded her. He doubled over, groaning. Fire raced up his sleeve. Annalise lunged, tearing at the smoldering fabric, dousing it with a wet cloth. Beneath it, his skin blistered, raw and bleeding where old burn scars split open. From the street, shouting, then silence, running, someone yelling, They're coming! Heavy boots thundered. Then the door burst open. Not the arsonists. The blacksmith, broad-shouldered, soot on his collar. The same man whose boy Annalise had once cured of fever. Miss Booker, Doc, where are they? Gone, she rasped. We gotta stop this fire. before it spreads to the others." In minutes, a line of townsfolk formed. Buckets passed hand to hand from the well. The burning curtain was slashed down. Water poured across blackened walls. Smoke hissed and retreated. Annalise didn't recognize their faces anymore. Only the haze of steam and Silas's pale features, jaw clenched tight. When the last spark died, the clinic stood charred but upright. Not lost. Not fallen. She helped Silas into the back exam room, laid him on the wooden table where he'd once healed others. Now it was her turn to heal him. The room filled with the stench of scorched flesh and iron-rich blood. Annalise opened the supply box with shaking, wet fingers, cleaned the burn, plucked glass from his shoulder and neck. Each time he tensed against the pain, she held his hand, not tightly, not loosely. "Look at me," she whispered. "Breathe." He did, wordless. By the time she finished wrapping the burns, his right hand was swollen, darkened, but still moved at her touch. He spoke, hoarse. "Fire didn't kill me." She bowed her head. "But it nearly took you from me." That's when the tears came. Not from pain, but for the first time, from fear. Fear of losing the only man who'd never looked at her as if she were something to be erased. By morning, the clinic reeked of ash and sweat, but people came, not for treatment, to help. The blacksmith brought his sons, hammers and pine wood in hand. His wife arrived with bread and clean rags. An old woman placed sprigs of dried lavender by the scorched window frame. "For what she did for my boy," they said. "For what he did for my hand." Annalise stood by the window, fingers still stained with Silas's blood. She no longer hid them. Silas lay unconscious in the back room, breathing slow but steady. She sat beside him, his hand in hers, never letting go. Outside, snow began to fall again. Soft, gentle flakes after 3 days of angry wind. Winter had truly arrived. But inside, she knew, this cold wasn't here to take anymore. It was here to hold, but returned. Rumors spread faster than the smoke from last week's fire. The scent of scorched wood hadn't yet faded from the clinic walls when the summons was nailed to the church bulletin board. Emergency meeting at town hall. On the matter of moral disorder in the community. No names were needed. Everyone knew who it was about. That night, the wind tore through the crossroads, hurling snow sideways across the wooden storefronts. But the town's old meeting hall filled to its seams. No one spoke above a hush. Only the shuffle of boots on the hard floor, glances passed like cards, whispers sewn tight like stitches in coarse cloth. Silas wore a white shirt, bandages still visible at the wrist. Annalise stood beside him in a gray dress, long coat, hair pinned high. No jewelry, no smile, just a spine held straight like someone had hammered it to the truth. When they entered, the noise faltered, like someone had drawn a bow across a silent string. Mayor Harrow, a round man whose collar always looked too tight, banged his gavel. "We're here to address a matter causing concern in our community." Gideon Hale sat in the front row, face clean as if he'd never smelled smoke. A scratch on his cheek, not from that night, but from being shoved aside by the blacksmith during the chaos. Still, he sat tall, as if nothing stained him. "I won't mince words," Gideon said, rising. "We've got a colored woman living under the same roof as a half-blood man. No marriage, no papers, and they dare call that place a clinic? It's a disgrace, a breeding ground for moral rot." A few heads nodded, but toward the back, a cough broke the silence. And then a man stood. The blacksmith. "My boy's fever broke because of Miss Booker," Dr. Whitaker stitched my wife's belly last fall. If that's what you call immoral, then I guess I owe my life to sin. A faint laugh, tight in the throat. Then an old woman rose, her frail hands pressed to her chest. I don't care who they are. I care that I'm still breathing after that fever swept through half the street, and it was her hand that cooled my forehead. She ain't licensed, someone shouted. And what license did you have to throw fire through their window? Someone else shot back. The room cracked open like spring ice under boot. Voices rose, some angry, some defending. Amid the din, Silas leaned toward Annalise. You don't have to stay for this. There are places, Boston, Chicago, where they'd teach you medicine properly, with certificates, with respect. I could write you a letter. She didn't look at him. Her gaze fixed ahead, not at anyone, but through everyone, through every accusation, through every wall built out of fear. You want me to leave? She asked. Silas exhaled slowly. I don't want to see you burned again, not by fire, not by their words. Would you come with me? I don't know who I'd be without the clinic, without this place. Then I'd lose my place to begin again. Silence, long enough to let the wind whistle through the cracks of the old hall. Then Annalise stepped forward. She didn't apologize, didn't explain, didn't promise. She just said, steady and clear, I've been running all my life, from towns that said I wasn't enough, from doors slammed shut because of my skin, from fingers pointing and saying, not your place. Her eyes swept the room, paused for the briefest moment on Gideon's face, then moved on. This time I choose to stay, not because someone let me, but because I am useful. I heal people, and if that unsettles you, then perhaps it's you who needs treating. She turned to Silas, voice firm, eyes dry. And I choose you. No applause followed, but no one stopped her from walking back down. Outside, the snow had settled. The clinic's wooden walls still bore the black of flame, but the lamp inside its window glowed steady. Silas opened the door. Annalise stepped through first. He lingered on the porch a moment. Thank you, he said. For what? For not running from me. She placed her hand on his chest, not to touch, but to anchor. Don't try to send me away before they get the chance. I've had enough of that. He nodded. No protest, no promise. And for the first time, they stood side by side. Not because a body was dying, not because something was burning, but because they had chosen to. In the hush of night, for once, two people who'd never belonged anywhere found a place that didn't ask for a pledge. Just standing still was enough. Spring did not return with fanfare. It came in the drip of water from a scorched eave, in the softness of mud beneath worn boots, in the honeysuckle pushing up again along the splintered fence behind the clinic, where fire once licked everything bare. Silas still walked with a limp, but he could pour his own tea without trembling. Annalise no longer had to sit vigil at his bedside, yet she still rose before sunrise, brewed herbs, and laundered sheets as if resting was something she'd never been permitted. They didn't speak much about the fire, nor the town hall. They let those things drift past like meltwater in the spring, acknowledged, but not allowed to define them. The clinic was rebuilt, not bigger, not newer, but in the eyes of the townsfolk, it was no longer the strange house of a limping doctor and a black woman who worked for nothing. It was the place where children were pulled back from whooping cough, where old Miss Agnes learned to walk again after her stroke, where the blacksmith no longer got swindled for back pain pills. One morning in early April, as the last of the snow dissolved into memory, a boy burst through the clinic door, breathless. "Is Dr. Booker here? My sister, she can't breathe." No one corrected him. No one smirked. No one asked, "Don't you mean Miss Booker?" Annalise stood, took her bag, and followed, her gray skirt rising behind her in the bright spring light. The letter came in a thick envelope, sealed in red wax from Chicago Medical College. The handwriting was even and deliberate. "We are impressed with the submitted record, along with the letter of recommendation from Dr. Silas Whitaker. By unanimous decision, the board invites Miss Annalise Booker to join our formal medical program this coming fall term." Silas received 1-2. A request to guest lecture on emergency surgery, should he be available. Annalise laid her letter on the table. She said nothing, just stared out the window, where a gnarled apple tree sent up shy green buds among brittle limbs. "Do you think I should go?" she asked. Silas folded his letter, laid his hand, burned, mended, steady, atop hers. Not pressing, not pulling, just enough weight to keep her here. "I think, wherever you're needed most, is wherever you choose to stay." They were married on a late spring afternoon, when the wind no longer sliced but carried the scent of new weeds and wild grass. There was no church, no preacher, no champagne, no layered cake. Just rows of wooden chairs beneath the old elm behind the clinic, the only patch of ground the fire hadn't touched. A plain white cloth draped over the worn examination table, now an altar. Children of the town braided crowns of ivy and honeysuckle. A shoemaker's daughter placed a bouquet in Annalise's hands. Lavender, dandelions, wild daisies, gathered after school from the eastern fields. Silas wore his last good shirt, whiter than his scarred heart. His dark hair combed back, burned hand folded behind his back, not hidden, but not on display. Annalise wore a faded blue dress, pieced together from 2 donated by the fabric shop widow. No veil, nothing to conceal. Mayor Harrow read a few stilted words, the wind snatching at his voice. When he asked, "Who here bears witness to this union?" Nearly the whole town stepped forward, not out of curiosity, but because after so many hard winters, people needed to believe spring was real. Silas looked at Annalise without blinking. She nodded. No vows, no performance, but her eyes said, "I won't leave. I won't run. I won't apologize for existing anymore," he whispered, for her ears only. "I don't know how to begin, but if you're here, I'll learn." They didn't kiss. They only held hands, firm and silent, amid the wind, amid eyes that once judged, now softened like frost giving way to earth. That summer, the old sign outside the clinic was replaced. Not painted, not gilded, just a thick piece of wood, hand-carved. Letters uneven, the edges still rough. But travelers paused, looking as if seeing something that hadn't been named in a long while. Dr. Whitaker and Dr. Booker General Practice. Open for all, no slogans, no proof. Just a name. And for them, that was enough. If this story made your heart pause, leave a small trace of kindness in the comments below. Tap like to let us know you still believe in decency. And don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Love Echoes, where forgotten hearts are finally called by their true names.